At the end of World War II, the world was divided by deep wounds and profound misunderstandings. Nowhere was this more evident than in the treatment and expectations of prisoners of war, WWII in 1945. As American forces advanced across the Pacific, they encountered not just enemy soldiers, but civilians, nurses, comfort women, and support staff who had been caught in the machinery of war. Among them were Japanese women who expected the worst. These women had been taught that capture by enemy forces meant certain dishonor, torture, or death. The Japanese military code emphasized death before surrender. For women especially, capture was considered a fate worse than death itself. When these Japanese women arrived at American POW camps, they carried with them not just the trauma of war, but deep-seated fears about what awaited them. They had heard stories, some true, many propaganda, about how prisoners would be treated. What they didn't expect was to be treated according to the Geneva Convention. What they couldn't imagine was being treated as human beings. On one particular day, the women were served their meals. The trays contained substantial portions: meat, vegetables, bread, and fruit. Quality food. Abundant food. At first, they were suspicious. Was this food poisoned? Was this some kind of trick before punishment? But hunger eventually overcame fear, and they ate. It was only later, when they saw American officers eating in an adjacent area, that they made a startling discovery. The officers were eating the same food, the exact same meals from the same kitchen. This realization broke something open inside these women. Many wept openly, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming cognitive dissonance of the moment. They had been told we were demons, that we would torture and humiliate them. When they realized we gave them our own food, the same food our officers ate, it shattered everything they had been taught about their enemy. These tears represented more than gratitude. They were tears of confusion, relief, and the painful realization that they had been lied to. Everything they had been taught about American barbarity was contradicted by this simple act of basic human dignity. The treatment of these Japanese POWs stood in stark contrast to what Allied prisoners often experienced in Japanese captivity. While not perfect, American adherence to international law regarding POWs was dramatically different from the brutal conditions in many Japanese camps. But for these women in that moment, it wasn't about comparison or politics. It was about the simple, profound shock of being treated as human beings by people they had been taught were monsters. This story reminds us of the power of propaganda to dehumanize, and the power of simple human decency to break through that dehumanization. It shows us how war distorts truth, and how small acts of humanity can have profound psychological impacts. These women's tears were a bridge, a moment when the walls built by wartime propaganda crumbled in the face of an unexpected reality. They were treated not as enemies to be degraded, but as human beings entitled to basic dignity. In the aftermath of one of history's most brutal conflicts, these tears represented something essential: the recognition that even in war, humanity can persist, that treating others with dignity, even former enemies, is not weakness but strength. The story of these Japanese female POWs and their tears over a simple meal reminds us that beneath the uniforms, the propaganda, and the conflict, we are all human beings. And sometimes, it takes something as simple as sharing food to remember that fundamental truth. Their tears watered the seeds of post-war reconciliation between two nations that would eventually become strong allies. A reminder that the path from enemy to friend often begins with the smallest acts of unexpected kindness.